Hi, I'm Clara, and welcome to the Practice with Clara podcast, where we dive into philosophy and all things yoga related, which has been my passion for the last 20 years. In today's episode, we dissect what is a chakra. We go into the heart chakra, themes around them, blockages, and all things heart. And then lastly, we answered a couple of your questions around the business of yoga. If you haven't already, subscribe to the podcast, and we hope you enjoy today's episode.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Practice with Clara podcast. You're sitting with Stephanie
And Clara
for today's episode on Anahata Chakra. So we thought we'd open by talking a little bit about what the chakras are, why they're important, and why we're talking about them so much.
Okay, so let's just start off with what is a chakra. A chakra literally translates as wheel, and it is an intersection of energy lines that intersect inside of the body. And so the energy lines in Chinese medicine are known as meridians. In Ayurvedic medicine, which is Indian medicine, we call them nadis. So an intersection of nadis is considered a chakra. And why it's considered a wheel is that those energy lines, when they intersect, literally create a vortex of energy. And so we actually have thousands of chakras in our body, thousands of intersections of energy lines, but the ones that we focus on as yogis go up our main energy channel, the one that we as yogis focus on, known as Sushumna. And that is an energy line that starts in the base of the pelvis, goes through the middle of the spine all the way to the top of the head. And then within that energy line, there are many intersections. And the 7 that we focus on are the ones that we've been talking about the last couple of weeks. First one being at the base, the second one being just below the belly button, third one at the solar plexus, fourth one at the heart, which is Anahata. It's the one that we're talking about today. Fifth one goes to the throat. The sixth one is at the third eye center, which is the middle of the head. And then the 7th one is the top of the head or just above the head, depending upon who you talk to. Now, there are many lineages that actually believe that there are 12 chakra points on Sushumna, but generally, the school of thought is there are 7. And so why do we focus on them as yogis? So it's said that at the base of our pelvis sits our creative force known as Shakti or Kundalini. And this is this dormant creative force that lives inside of the pelvis. And as yogis, or traditionally, I should say, yogis would focus on igniting or awakening that energy and having it rise up Sushumna and go to the third eye center, which is where our consciousness lives. And so when our creative force and the consciousness come together, they coincide. It is said that we are awakened, or that we receive enlightenment, or that we receive nirvana, all those words kind of being the same thing. And so a lot of the practices that we do as yogis, a lot of the pranayama, breath practices, some of the asanas, definitely a lot of meditation and mantra is geared towards awakening these energy points. And it is said when all 7 energy points, known as these chakras, are open, right, then the energy can flow freely, and then we are awakened. So why we're focusing on one chakra every week is that there are colors and energies and themes associated with each one, which are very fascinating. And Steph and I love themes, so we really wanted to dive into that, because that's pretty much what we can geek out on all day. And so if you ever notice that either on a physical level you're feeling a blockage in a particular part of your body, the tools in terms of the themes or the breath practices or the asana practices, the physical practices, all of those can help kind of move the energy in that area so that it flows easily. And then that way it's easier for our creative force to be awakened and for us to find liberation. That being said, I feel like as in this day and age, in terms of the yoga practice, we don't really focus on becoming awakened. We focus on being good people. And good people, I feel like part of that is kind of fine-tuning and kind of moving the stagnant energy that day-to-day life can kind of create in the body. And so that was a long introduction, but that's the sense of what the chakras are and why we're focusing on them. Steph, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Just something that's interesting I learned through Reiki is why we give Reiki in the practice with the hands is because there's a chakra in each palm. Mm-hmm. So that is an energy point where you're literally thinking about the light and the energy and giving it to whoever you're treating, and it can be yourself. which is, it's just different ways of working with energy in the body. And for me, with the chakras, when we talked about them in the teacher training, my introduction to them, it gives you something to focus on. If you're working with your own, if you're feeling sad, then it's like, okay, why am I sad? And heart chakra, also the opposite of that, the blockage would be sadness, sorrow. And then the element is air. So it's like, okay, how do I use air, get things moving to break up the like sadness I feel?
Yes.
So it's just different ways. It's a system to use for yourself. If you like using your imagination, going a little bit more esoteric to work with different things we experience every day, like what you said. So if you have sore hips, you're working maybe with the sacral chakra, which we talked about last week. Anything in the heart or upper back would be Anahata, which we're talking about today. It's fascinating.
Yes.
It's fun.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we're reading from a great book called The Wheel of Life. Yeah, Wheel of Life by Anodea Judith.
Yeah.
I also highly recommend, Anodea wrote another book before this one called Eastern Body, Western Mind, which is a big breakdown of the chakras. Chakras are kind of what she talks about, I think, in most of her books. So if you want a good introduction to an explicit breakdown of what are chakras, Anodea Judith is your lady.
Yeah, and she links it with the scientific side of it. If you're interested in the limbic system, hormones, all the different muscles, that end of it, because we talk more about the themes around it, because that's what we're interested in, the philosophy. But if you want the science, and there is that in this book as well, so you can...
And the Wheels of Life.
Wheels of Life, yeah, holding it up for the viewers. Okay, on that note, I'm going to read the piece I've chosen to center us on the heart chakra. We have now reached the central point of the chakra system. Even in our language, the heart refers to the center of things, the essence, the kernel of truth, as in, go to the heart of the matter. This is our spiritual center, our core, the place that unites forces from above and below, within and without. The task of the fourth chakra is to integrate and balance the various aspects of our being. In doing so, it brings a radiant sense of wholeness to the entire organism, an acceptance of the exquisite interpretation of both spirit and matter. Within this sense of wholeness lie the seeds of inner peace.
Can you just read the last two sentences?
In doing so, the heart chakra brings a radiant sense of wholeness to the entire organism, an acceptance of the exquisite interpretation of both spirit and matter. Within this sense of wholeness lie the seeds of inner peace.
Beautiful. And so one of the reasons that she talks about kind of the intersection between spirit and matter is that the bottom three chakras are known as matter. They're the physical, tangible, closest to the earth chakras. And then the ones above the throat, third eye, and crown are known as the spirit or the consciousness or that which is esoteric. So the exoteric is down below and the esoteric is up above. And the heart chakra is essentially where the two meet. So it is said that the union is found inside of our hearts, which I love that idea.
And would you say it's harmonizing the idea of the body and the mind, because you're bringing maybe something, an idea, your imagination out into the physical world, like living out your heart's desire. Would that be like the merger of the...
What do you think?
I would say yes. And that's kind of what I was chewing on in terms of this chakra when I was thinking about just the themes around the heart chakra: love, acceptance, compassion,
forgiveness,
healing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Self-love, love for others. Yeah, it's a big one. It's a really big one. And you know, it's said that like on the shadow side of that, like grief and sadness also live in the chest. They live in the heart. So when we're feeling that in our own bodies, that would also be a time to do a heart opening practice, either through mantra, meditation, or asana. Before
we get into the questions, I wanted to talk about the practice I've done with you in terms of heart chakra and a practice for devotion when we do the prostration namaskars, and you've asked the room to devote their practice to someone or to yourself. So talk a little bit about why that would be a heart chakra class and what you would do in that class?
So one of the biggest themes that I work with in my own life and that I teach is this idea of surrender. And surrender also lives in the heart. In order to love another or to be devoted, you have to give up a part of yourself. You have to give up something in order to make space for this other, right? And so the idea of like bhakti practices, devotional practices are this: everything that you do it for another. And the other can be God, the divine, it can be your mother, it can be your child, your dog, whomever, or whatever. It can be for world peace. But this idea of giving yourself over to something that is outside of yourself. And so in order to do that, you have to surrender a part of yourself. And through that surrender, we find liberation, because the greatest amount of suffering is created through attachment. And usually that's around our quote unquote ego. And ego in this definition would be the part of ourselves that is, that keeps us alive. Like, so the survival mechanism, the one that thinks about me first. And the ego is an important thing to have. It does keep us alive. But in this breath, or in this way, it's important for us to soften around the ego in order to allow our hearts to expand. So another great theme of the heart chakra is expansion, right? This idea, that's why the element is air. It's wide, it's vast. So we need to surrender, we need to soften. And so for me, at least, any practice that has to do with the heart is always a practice of surrender for me, of letting go, of trusting in, and kind of bringing myself either to the mat or to the practice, the meditation cushion, and being open to the expansiveness of all things.
Oh, that's so beautiful.
Yeah, beautiful and really intense. Intense in the fact that, like, you have to soften. Yeah. I have to soften in order to connect to and allow myself to go into the vast expansion that is love in all way, shape, and form.
I love that.
Yeah. What do you feel when you do the practice, when you do the devotional practice? What is the experience for you?
I think I've cried every single time. And I feel, because I love heart-opening classes, but specifically in the ones I've done with you, because of the devotional quality, and in the prostration namaskars, what Clara asks is that you get your forehead down on the ground and then offer your hands palm up as a symbol of, I think, softening and reception. So you're going to receive whatever it is that's coming at you without attachment to your desired outcome. And usually when I do heart-opening classes, there's this elevation. It's this big, expansive, but uprising.
Yes.
Whereas with yours, I stay a little bit closer to the ground, I think, because it's so devotional and humbling. There's an essence of humility. Yeah, so that's how I feel.
The prostrations are one of the oldest mudras around, and so prostration is generally seen as lying down, belly on the earth, with either arms stretched out in front of you with palms facing up, or hands in prayer out in front of you with the palms just gently open. And the idea of that is actually it's an offering.
Okay.
So you're giving yourself to something outside of yourself, and that's what that means.
And that's the extension of saying, pick someone to give this to, and then you're offering the practice or your breath, whatever it is in that moment, to what you've chosen.
Yes, and then the benefit of that for ourselves is it takes us out of our ego, or what, like Alan Watts calls the bug's eye view, this view of just seeing what's directly in front of you. It expands your perception, expands your awareness. And so with that, the small things seem even smaller. And so, at least for me, it puts into perspective, like, the petty things that I might be upset about really in the grand scheme of things means, and that means, it's like not a big deal. Like, you're like, no problem. And so that's, I think, why the practice, at least for me, is so powerful, the devotional practice.
I think too, because if you're thinking about someone else, you forget about your own problems. Like, I've just thought of, like, one of the reasons I love nannying or when I was volunteering is that you're going and doing things for others. And for me, that feels really good.
Yeah.
And caring for someone else.
Yeah.
You're not worried about your own shit.
Yeah.
For lack of a better term.
Yeah. It takes the weight off.
Yeah.
Which I think is important.
So let's talk about two people had the same question around blockages of the heart chakra, what those would be and how they would manifest, like some signs that you're like, okay, this is the chakra that I'm unbalanced.
Mm-hmm. The most obvious one is a tightness in the chest, like a physical tightness in the chest, or another one is if you'd look at someone's posture or look at your own posture and your shoulders are rounded forward, right? This idea of physically protecting your heart, right? Or if you're having any injuries that are happening in the chest or the shoulders, that generally tells you that something's going on in the heart.
Or shallow breath?
Yes.
Yeah.
Shallow breath would be the other biggest obvious one. And so if you can't breathe deep, there's constriction in the chest. And so we always, as physical practitioners of yoga, meaning that we practice asana versus meditation as our primary focus, we always come to the body first because the body never lies. Yeah. And that's such a cool concept in the fact that sometimes our minds can we have a really good way of talking ourselves into anything. Mm-hmm. And so if you notice that you're doing that, or if you're not really sure what's going on, right, take a couple of deep breaths and go into the body and observe. Like one of my favorite things to do at the beginning of my own practice is a body scan, right? And just kind of scanning the body from top to bottom. I learned that from the Vipassana style of meditation, right? And then you kind of observe, where do I feel tight, or where does it feel uncomfortable or sticky? And then that tells you, that's a great indication of what's going on. Other ways that we would know that the heart chakra is blocked is these ideas of sadness, of grief. So now you go into the emotional body, so out of the physical body into the emotional body, right? There's constriction, there's a lack of forgiveness. Forgiveness is a big one that has to do with the heart. So you're not able to forgive, to let go, you can't surrender, you're holding on tight, right? And again, that tightness you generally feel in the chest. And or you're not taking care of yourself. Self-care comes into this one as well, which is part of self-love.
Yeah, and one of the big themes in the Wheels of Life is the idea of healing. And Anodea Judith speaks of healing in terms of relating, and whether that's your relationship to whatever you're working through within yourself, like discovering your passion, following your heart, or relationship with others. Mm-hmm. And that's the big thing with love, is how you're relating to the people around you, the people you love. We all come up against blockages in our relationships. I think that's a big part of the beauty of being in relationship, is that conflicts arise and you work through them. But the healing comes through the softening against the other, against whatever obstacles you're coming up against.
Yes.
What can you speak to as an example, Clara, where you've been out of balance in Anahata Chakra? Like, what did you feel or experience, and what did you do to resolve it?
So first, let's break down what Anahata means, which means the unstruck. It's a beautiful word. Hatha means struck, and then the letter A in front of any word in Sanskrit means the opposite. So hatha meaning struck, and A meaning unstruck. So it's the unstruck vibration that lives inside of us. It's the potential. We talked about this, I feel like, in another podcast. I love this idea. It's the potential of sound, of vibration, and that is the heart, right? It's the potential of this connection to all things. So the question being, when have I come across this in my own life? I think that I think that the one that comes up right now is, and I've spoken a little bit about this before, is definitely when I first started practicing yoga, I don't think I realized how anxious I was and how high strung I was. And so with the anxiety and the high strungness came a lot of projection onto the world around me, projection onto people specifically, and how that showed up for me is that I was really angry at my mother, and there were things that happened in our household in my teenage years where I didn't feel taken care of, and when I left my house and and started to kind of unpack my feelings specifically on the mat, I realized how hurt I was. Like underneath the anger is hurt. And so hurt also, this specific kind of hurt, meaning feeling unloved or not taken care of, lives in the heart center. So it was really interesting when we would do back bends in the practice when I was in a yoga class, and how when I would go into them, I would start to feel really nauseous. And anxious, and I would think of how quickly can I get out of this pose. So those were really great indicators, like there's something here. I definitely wasn't smart enough at that point in time to unpack all that, but I kept showing up to the practice every day, and I felt like a couple of months, maybe 6 to 8 months in, as I was doing these repetitive back bends, because in the practice I was doing, you did back bends every single day, I started to feel my own pain. And that was really cool because I had been so constricted and rigid so that I wouldn't have to feel these feelings. And now that there was a place in my life, meaning on the mat, where I could do it, and it felt safe to do it, there was a softening that happened. And like you said, I cried. Like, I think there was a good 2 weeks where I think I cried every single day on the mat. When I finally, when I feel like the ice had finally broken, or when I finally broke through how I was, what I was holding on to or what I was resisting, then all of a sudden I surrendered and softened, and all of a sudden this flood of emotion came through. And I honestly think that a lot of forgiveness that I've had towards my mother in terms of my upbringing with her was through the yoga practice. It actually wasn't through therapy. And I remember when I finally did start therapy, probably about 8 years later, my therapist was blown away. She was like, wow, you really have a lot of forgiveness for your mother, even though it was a little bit rough in your house. And I said, yeah, it was the practice. And I didn't, the cool part about the physical practice, at least for me, is that it's nonverbal. So I didn't, there was no quote unquote mind fucking. I was just every experience they say and every emotion lives in your body. And so that's why the physical practice for some of us can be so powerful, because it unlocks these, the residual effects of an experience without us having to dissect it on an analytical level. And there is something to dropping things analytically, but I think, at least for me, forgiveness really works better if I do it in my body. Yeah. Whew, that was a long answer. But now I turn it over to you. When has it shown up for you, and what was your experience? So when has a constriction in the heart shown up for you, and what happened?
I also feel anxious. And I get short of breath, and I start getting upper back stuff. And I've had that this week because I've been sitting with a decision I've been avoiding. And it always, my shoulders, my back, and I get fidgety. And that's my cue. I'm like, you need to just chill out and sit down, take child's pose. It's not for me to resolve a big heart opening practice. It's more breathing deep and sitting with how I feel, which is not always what I want to do. But it's anxiety. It's a certain angst, and I can't breathe.
Yes, shortness of breath is a really good description.
Yeah. And I think, you kind of touched on, rejection is another big theme of this space, because we go through phases of rejection and we reject others in our life, and then coming through that and forgiving either yourself or the other person. That's what comes up for me when I think about this space. And it's, I would agree that I will yogis, moving through the body and instead of going through the mind. And I don't like that because I can get stuck in rationalizing.
Yes.
This is what I should be doing. This is what the norm is. This is that. And that has also come up for me in therapy, where if I go and I breathe and I move my body, the answer usually lands. And it's whether or not I want to receive it.
Right. And what to do around it.
Yeah. So last piece on the heart chakra, Clara, can you comment on what happens if there's a blockage in one of the chakras, and how does it affect the other chakras?
Well, I feel like we touched on this a little bit before, but essentially in traditional yoga philosophy, the thought is the energy can't move up unless all the chakras are clear. So if your second chakra, meaning your sacral chakra, the one below your belly button above your pubic bone, if that one is blocked, the energy will just stay down below and will not arise to the other one. So a great example of that would be happening is if you're feeling lethargic, you're feeling heavy to the ground, right? Because those two chakras on the bottom have to do with earth and water. They're heavier. So if you're feeling that kind of that means that generally the chakras on the bottom are blocked. So you do practices to open those up, right? If you notice, and then that being said, there's the opposite. Instead of a chakra being blocked, there's also when a chakra is too wide open, it's not grounded. And so generally the one that we talk about the most around that is the third eye center, is when the third eye is blasted too wide open, right? You generally, this is where anxiety lives, right? Is up in the head. And so when you can't focus on anything, when you feel like you're focusing on 50 things at once and you're kind of moving all over the place, what my friends used to call like the tornado, right? And in Ayurvedic medicine, we would call that vata derangement, meaning air derangement, because you're too hot, you're too open. And so with that, you would do the opposite by kind of grounding down. So that being said, if like you're feeling, if the heart center is too wide open. So another example of that, if you've ever been in a yoga class that did quite a bit of heart opening and then you didn't really ground after that, right? You didn't do a floor sequence or you left before Shavasana, your heart is like wide open and you go outside and then all of a sudden all the sounds are super overwhelming and there's like all kinds of people coming towards you. And it's like, you feel like this sense of everything, like you can't filter anything. That means the heart center is too open. So we do focus on opening the chakras generally because they're blocked through regular life, right? Through experience. But there's also the opposite where sometimes they're too open and we actually need to close them a little bit. So both sides of the coin are important.
I'm just thinking about when I was a kid in kindergarten, my mom came to pick me up and the teacher was like, Mrs. Trembath, you have to tell Stephanie she can't kiss all of the kids. She needs to like... So as you're talking about too open, I'm like, I think my heart chakra is too open. I'm like in school wanting to hug and receive and kiss everyone.
How did everybody respond to that?
Not well.
Okay.
Like, it wasn't, the teacher was like, you need to tell Stephanie that she can't go and kiss all of the other kids. Or it was in preschool or something.
Right. But it's something where, and kids are great because they generally just tell you exactly how they feel. So they probably were like, no.
Yeah. And kids just give love. But even as an adult, too, just to close that comment, I sometimes feel like I do exude that energy and receive and accept everyone when maybe a little bit more discernment in some cases could have been more useful. Yeah.
Well, I feel like you talking about that is kind of the difference between the one that comes to mind for me is like compassionate listening versus taking on what's going on, which we've talked a lot about in terms of boundaries. But same idea is like compassion lives in the heart, but we also want to make sure that we don't take everybody's problems or feelings on, because that would also be an example of the heart being too open.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. What's our next, where are we going next, Steph?
So we had two really great questions in the Facebook group. I'm just going to read the first one. So my question is around negotiating pay with studio owners as a yoga instructor.
Okay, we're shifting gears.
We are majorly shifting gears now. Yeah.
No more heart.
No more heart. Well,
on to business.
This is related to heart stuff.
Totally. I'm totally teasing.
My experience right now is that there is a very low glass ceiling in the studios where I live, and it is more economical for them to hire brand new instructors versus paying an experienced instructor more money. I see the value in teaching in studios because they serve as a place to practice in the presence of community and meet new students, etc. But I feel a struggle about teaching in studios when the pay is so low and I'm being asked to perform lots of other non-yoga tasks. So I think this is related to heart chakra because we love teaching. And I've been in this position where you're teaching for free or you're teaching for very little because I get so much out of giving that to others. Mm-hmm. So Yeah.
So where's the question in that?
The question is, what is your advice in that relationship with studio owners? What is your experience in this? Your advice and your experience of this, if you have any.
So I think the first question that I would ask is, what do you want? Like, what does this student or what does this teacher want, right? Mm-hmm. Does this teacher, what's most important to you? Is it most important to you to be part of community? Is it most important to pay your bills? Because that's like that's a real thing. Is it important to feel recognized for, your ability as a teacher? So I think that would be the first question I would ask, because if you're like, community is, my number one reason why I teach, then maybe like what I would do, what I've done in the past is I'd actually prefer to work for free than to work for very little. Mm-hmm. And so I've either donated what I've made to charity, right? So that I am working for free, or I tell them that we won't charge, that everybody can come either to the class for free, depending upon what it is, or that, that I would donate it, because to get very real about it, I actually find it kind of insulting when a studio is like, this is what I can pay you. And I said, and I, at least for me, I've spent over $10,000 on my education in this field. And so if you're going to pay me $25 for 2 hours, that's like less than minimum wage. So to me, I would rather work for free. So and then I'm like, I'd happily do Seva if that community is is a community I want to be a part of or that I want to service, then I would do it for free, or I would donate personally, because I'm like, it's like essentially getting your master's in something and then being like, cool, so we'd love you to teach third grade. Yeah. Or something like that. So I would definitely, that's been my experience. So if it's important for, like, if this is the way that you're making money, because there's some people who have a full-time job and then they do yoga on the side, like they teach for fun, then I feel like no problem. That $25 is like whatever. It's an added bonus just to be in the room. But if it's your main source of income, the other thing you need to think about is like, what am I worth? Right? And how the biggest thing for yoga teachers is that because generally the pay isn't very good at studios, and studios are doing their best, their overhead, depending upon what style of yoga they teach, like if they teach hot yoga or, where they are and what their rent is. I get the business side of it. But that being said, paying your teachers very, very little won't keep good teachers generally. And so in that way, rent a space and teach on the side. The benefit of teaching at a studio is that you can build your following so that once you've got an established following, then you can step out of the yoga studio, and depending upon how people feel about you, they'll come follow you. So it can be a good, a good start off point is what I would recommend. And that's why we say as young yoga teacher, we tell young yoga teachers in our teacher training, like, teach everywhere, say yes to everything, and just get out there and, try to get your 10,000 hours in, right? Because once you get your 10,000 hours of teaching in, then you're really good at what you do. You have a craft. Before that, you don't have a craft. You're like figuring it out as you go. So I think being paid very little for that is totally fine, because you're still working on your offering. That was a long... Yeah.
It's great though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. What do you think?
I think it comes down to what your end goal is. Because as someone who, having done a lot of trainings, also I feel like I've spent well over $5,000, maybe not quite 10 yet. I'm still finishing my 300 hour with you.
Yeah.
But I taught everywhere. I quit my day job. I did all of the things. And taught for free, taught for very little. And what it's come down to for me, even in reflecting, is like, what's the value of your time? Mm-hmm. And what are you willing to give up in order to get to where you want to go?
Yes.
And for me, I very quickly discovered like yoga wasn't my end goal.
Yeah.
I was moving in the wrong direction, because my personal advice is, if you don't want to work for free, you're probably in the wrong profession. You should love what you're doing and just trust. Like, I've done so many things without a formal compensation, trusting that later it would come, and it always has.
Yes.
And like that's not always realistic for people, but I've done so many jobs, nannying, waitressing, all sorts of things to like compensate.
Same.
So, and it's just like Anahata, follow your heart, and
Yeah.
it always works out.
Yeah, as long as you're listening. As long as you're listening and following the signs versus just blind faith.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and just again, it's the value of your time. Like know what it is you want to do for yourself in a day. Because I at one point was teaching 3 classes in a 12 to 16 hour window.
Oh, yeah.
Like getting up at 5 and
yeah.
I wouldn't be home for like 12 hours, eating dinner at like 10:30. And I did that for like 2 years. I would never go back to that.
Same. I used to teach 25 classes a week. And my Tuesday would start at 7 a.m. and my last class ended at 8:30 p.m.
Yeah,
and I taught at 3 different studios. It was crazy. But I put in my time because because I believed for me that this was what I wanted to do. And so through putting in all that time and effort, right, you start to build a following.
And that's how you built your teacher trainings, your workshops, and now your own platform.
Yeah.
Like that, those people are there for you. They went to the studio. Eventually it comes, I'm the student now that I go for the teacher. I don't care where I'm practicing.
Yeah, same.
So
Same. Okay, what's our next one?
Next question. So this is more around appropriation. We talked about this a little bit in our teacher training.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious about appropriation. I'm not sure how to ask this question appropriately, so forgive me if I step on toes or offend. My background in education are Catholic. I have an interest in interreligious dialogue. There are people who believe yoga cannot coexist with Christianity or Catholicism. I'm not one of those people. I actually think they blend quite well together, but when you consider that yoga comes out of Hinduism, how does this influence our conversation? Are the chakras part of Hinduism? How do we successfully respect and incorporate different traditions? Not to erase them or make them a melting pot, but to let all build off each other and talk to each other.
So yoga is its own philosophy. And Hinduism just means philosophy from India. So let's just get that going. The biggest thing with yoga is that it believes in a higher power, but the philosophy, traditional yoga philosophy, is insert word of choice. So whatever your version of God is, right? There's Tibetan yoga, there's like Vedantic yoga, there's all kinds of yoga. There is Catholic and Christian yoga. And so you can fit whatever your religion or philosophy is, you can fit it into yoga. There's a space for it. Mm-hmm. So that being said, the question, it's a good question because, and this is one that we talk so much about in the teacher training is, most people in the West who are practicing yoga are not from India. Mm-hmm. So are we culturally appropriating a philosophy and a way of life, a lifestyle that is not ours? The short answer, we usually have this conversation for about 3 hours in the training, but the short answer around this is there is space for everything in terms of you take what works for you and you leave the rest. But that being said, you honor where it came from. So we honor that it does come from India. We honor that traditionally we talk about the chakras, and traditionally we do mantra and meditation and all these things, right? But that being said, the practice should evolve as we evolve. I have this great, Mo Staff, one of my favorite MCs, hip hop MCs, right? He has a great song that goes, how is hip hop doing? And how hip hop is doing is how are we doing, right? What are we going through? What's happening in our lives, right? And that's what's happening in hip hop. And I feel the exact same way about yoga, like what's happening with us right now, because hopefully as we've evolved as humans, the practice also evolves. Like, I don't think it should be rigid or static. And that's why there are so many different styles of yoga and so many different cultures have taken it on. And you'll talk to most Indian people and they're thrilled to share the practice of yoga. That, it's a benefit to all of us because essentially it's a toolkit, whether or not you're doing the asana practice or whether or not you're doing meditation or mantra, right? It's a toolkit to make yourself whole again. Mm. And so there is, like, I love this question, there is at least my understanding is like the great religions are about connecting to the divinity, right, inside of us or outside of us, depending upon which religion you're talking about, but to find wholeness again, to be a part of something greater. And so I think yoga fits in that. That being said, you also, I think it's really important to honor where it came from and to know the history of it. And then from there, you evolve it as you go, right?
That is one thing in terms of the appropriation you offered, and we discussed at length, as you mentioned, is to thank your teachers, is to know the roots of what you're teaching. And this is why in every training I've taken with Clara, we revisit the history of yoga, the founders, where they came from, where the yoga went from there, and then kind of like a family tree of sorts of all the founders of yoga. So if someone asks you, you can speak to what you're saying. If you're using words in Sanskrit or telling pieces of a story you read in a magazine, you're not just paying lip service to something you don't really fully understand. That would be offensive.
Yes.
But if you have read and know what you're talking about, and thank your teachers, that's the biggest one. And you don't need to know all of the words. There's a lot of things that I can admit I'm like, I'm probably saying this wrong. I'm sorry, I don't know.
Yes.
But know the roots, your
Yes.
roots, and where it came from.
Yes.
And in that way you avoid the offensiveness of appropriating something.
Yes, that's not yours. And then also honoring that you are embodying, you are sharing this practice through an embodied experience. So you're bringing your own flavor to it because you've lived it. And this is what your truth is around the practice.
That actually goes into a question I had for you, which we can end on in terms of following your heart and creating a brand, so to speak, around practice with Clara. How do you manage kind of the relationship in something that you love so dearly, that's clearly brought you a lot of relief from pain, but also celebration in your body, your emotions? How do you reconcile that against running a business? And then the other half of that would be serving your community. Like, how do you marry those two aspects?
I think I don't think about it too much.
Okay.
So the first thing that comes to mind when you ask me this question is that I've been doing this so long, this being living yoga to the best of my ability, that it bleeds into everything that I do. And so running a business is a practice of yoga. Teaching is a practice of yoga, right? Parenting is a practice of yoga, right? Everything I'm trying, there are definitely moments where I don't. I'm not very yogic, but I do my best in every action that I do in all aspects of my life to be about yoga. And so what that means is connecting to my truth, moving from that place. Forgiving myself when I'm led astray, either through strong emotions or something either happening internally or externally, but always coming back to connecting to myself, connecting to my truth. How do I serve my community? And so one of the reasons why we made the platform is that I wanted to. I have such a such a great global community. I wanted to connect to them directly, because I used to be on another platform. And so it just felt like a very natural progression. And so this kind of comes back to the advice that we had given to one person of like, really listen and follow the path, because if you follow your instinct and like the natural momentum of your life, then I find you'll naturally go in the direction that serves naturally, if you're connected to your integrity. If you're not, then I feel like sometimes you end up somewhere and you're like, how did I end up here? I have no idea. But thinking about, I think that as a yogi, and what I mean by that is somebody who seeks wholeness, it bleeds into everything that I do. And so how I'm going to leave it actually to our listeners is, how can you, if you don't already, how can you take your practice off the mat? And what I mean by that is that the connection that you feel to yourself after a practice, how do you continue to feel that in all the actions that you do, whether you're a parent or a lover or a coworker or what have you, right? Can you remain connected to yourself and share that connection, that wholeness, right, to the people around you, not necessarily by saying anything, but by remaining connected and steadfast to yourself. And that is living in your heart. Right, Jack Kornfield's beautiful book, right? The Path with Heart is like doing everything with a connection to ourselves. And so then that way we stay true to the path that we're supposed to walk. Yeah.
Yeah.
So thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. Always a pleasure, Steph, to be with you and for you to bring questions. I really appreciate you holding space for that. And if you haven't already, subscribed to our podcast. And Steph brought it up earlier. We have a Facebook group called Practice with Clara Community. And we talk about all things related to yoga. And if you ever have questions that you'd like for us to go through on the podcast, you can post them there, and we'll pick them up here. Hope you're having a beautiful day, and stay true. Thank you for joining us today on the podcast. Today's podcast is brought to you by the Practice with Clara app. That's mine. I've created almost 100 yoga classes for you to do at home or on the go. And they're available to you on your favorite device, including mobile, desktop, and TV. These classes include Vinyasa, Slow Flow, Hatha, Restorative, Yin, Mantra, Meditation. I also just had a baby, so I created prenatal yoga for all 4 trimesters. So head over to clararobertsoss.com/join to learn more. Or search for the Practice with Clara app at your favorite app store. There's a 7-day free trial, so no commitment. And make sure to subscribe to the podcast. We've got lots of good stuff in store for you. Until next time, namaste.